Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Behind Research.
Yeah.
It's another Meet the People stream, which means we have with us another fantastic guest. So we have with us today Tamsin Smith, who is a lecturer and MAST coordinator in the maths department. Correct?
Yeah,
isn't
that's
it?
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about what that is then? What
Yeah.
your role is?
So I actually have two jobs.
Mhm.
So they are actually completely distinct, and I'm paid for and funded through completely different streams. So I work half the time in the maths department as a lecturer. It's sort of a role that's sort of grown into what it is now. I'll talk about that a bit later on. But essentially, it's a teaching contract within the maths department. And then the other half of my time, I work for the Maths Resource Centre, which is a completely different department at the university. And the Maths Resource Centre is a professional service that supports students and staff across the university with their mathematical problems or their mathematical research. And within the Maths Resource Centre, I coordinate the MAST service, which is the Maths and Statistics Teaching Service, which is fairly unique for this for universities generally. I think it's quite new. It's a service that was set up only 2 years ago, so we're sort of still in the infancy of setting up what that service really looks like. But essentially, we support staff and how they deliver mathematics and teach mathematics across their courses. So we do support the maths department to some degree, but primarily we work with subjects who teach mathematics as a service unit. So sort of chemists who teach mathematics, or pharmacists, or not just in the sciences as well, sort of in the social sciences and across engineering. Also, we would work with anyone. So anyone who basically has any level of mathematics.
So training for the lecturers who are delivering that training to their students.
It's not. We wouldn't describe it as training.
Support.
Well, again, support I think has a funny kind of connotation. Really, I would say we work in collaboration.
Okay.
Because we're working with professionals, they're academics who've been doing things for a long time, or maybe not for a very long time. So the work that we do is just looking at their practice and seeing whether or not we can do anything to collaborate with them to make improvements. It kind of comes from them. We don't go in and judge. They just come to us and say, "Oh, we're having all sorts of problems here. What can you suggest?" And we sort of go in and do an exploration of what they're doing, and then we're an evidence-based service, so we do look at sort of research papers, maths education research papers, or we look at practice-based research, and we just look at look and talk to those people and try and look at the evidence as well as how the students are getting on in their courses, and then we help them make changes. Or suggest changes. We don't even make the changes ourselves. They're just sort of like a conversation. I think it's quite like a consultancy service.
Yeah,
is how I sort of see it. I mean, that's not how it's actually branded, but that's how I see it. As just a safe space for academics, a confidential space for academics to come and talk about how they teach maths.
So I imagine you must pick up quite a wide range of not just maths knowledge, but also any kind of knowledge from the sciences. And
I mean, it's a bit bonkers really when I think about when you say what do I do on a daily basis. It's just completely, it's so diverse. Because we could have a lecturer who has just started lecturing, has never lectured ever before. They've just started a new job and they've never thought about it, and they've inherited some notes about something, some mathematical concept or something that they've been asked to teach, but they don't know where it leads to within their degree. And then we work with them about how things can be sequenced, or how learners learn particular aspects of that mathematical idea. We get a lot of sort of inquiries about things about like using digital tools for learning. So we sort of work a lot on those sorts of ideas and aspects as well. And we can co-teach with the lecturers themselves as well. So we quite often go and sort of co-teach with a group, and then they copy, and then we watch, and we sort of, as I said, it's not. I don't see it as. I see it as sort of like a collaboration where we can all, and we've learned as well from working with all these diverse groups of people as well.
Yeah, I imagine it's really interesting. Like again, you're learning things every day on the job, and
I think also is that it's this sort of idea in my mind that sort of is now deep rooted in my sort of educational beliefs, I suppose, that learners are so different in so many different ways. And maths sort of kind of comes across all these different subjects in our university, but the uses of it, how it's portrayed, how it's applied, the motivation from various different sort of people within the kind of process of learning is so different in different contexts. So yeah, really interesting, really different.
You said it's like a novel thing with university. So is it something that Bath is doing? Is like a new thing, or is like how did this like concept come about?
Yeah, so the Maths Resource Centre, which you might know as MASH, that's what it was sort of originally sort of called, and that's our sort of like branding. So MASH stands for Maths and Statistics Help. That's the acronym, and there are many MASHs in lots of universities across the world. So not most, but lots of universities have a maths sort of support centre where they support students. So MASH has been at this university since Jane White, I believe, was one of the people who Professor Jane White was one of the people who instigated MASH, and we it sort of set. Oh, I think I'm bleeding. Sorry. I don't know how I'm bleeding. Just stop that. Sorry. Do you want to pause for it? I'm not having a nosebleed, it's not the stress of talking about it.
Yeah, do you want to? Should we maybe make a pause for a minute? We'll be right back.
Sorry about that. Yes, MASH. What were we talking about? MASH. Yeah, how did MASH start? So Professor Jane Waite set up MASH in Bath University back in sort of the in 2008 or something. I think sort of that sort of region of time. And lots and lots of universities have a math support structure like we do have. Historically, MASH sat, I think, within the math department, but then it sort of moved over to professional services because as sort of support structures in the university grew, there are other support structures that come under the skills centre, like digital and academic skills or languages skills, all these sorts of things. And we sort of got MASH got sort of put in this sort of group with all these other things. And what kind of happened was that we saw lots of students come to us who needed mathematical help. But then often we could see from the drop-ins and the interactions that we had was that actually sometimes it wasn't entirely the student's fault, and there were sort of issues that went beyond just the student problem. And so we felt like we needed some sort of mechanism to sort of have that feedback loop back to the academics. And sometimes that's quite a difficult conversation if you say, like, we've got loads of students coming from a particular area, why is that? And in the past we used to have those conversations, and then they would say, well, what can you do to help us about it? And there wasn't anything because we were a student facing service. And because MASH sits within professional services, it's a bit weird because obviously I work in the maths department and I teach in the maths department. As the professional service, we're not allowed to teach. So that is kind of part of the kind of model, is that it is consulting and that we feed that back to them, that we have some sort of student issue, and then if they want to engage with us, we go in and sort of make that loop. And that is not a service that I believe is very commonplace. So MASH type services are commonplace.
Yeah, definitely. Like that's the kind of thing that I remember from my own undergraduate experience. And we had a maths support centre, and but it's like you say, recognising that maybe sometimes it's not the students' lack of understanding that's the problem.
There's something wrong, and obviously it's become much more apparent of recent years, sort of post-COVID, where students are coming in with completely different backgrounds, completely different prior, lived experience of their mathematics education. It's been interesting. It's an interesting model because some academics really want to talk to us and just improve their practice, and then there are others who we can see there are problems and things that are going on, but we can't do anything about it. It is certainly something that comes entirely from the academics. They come to us and we sort of help. So it's good. It's a good. It's still in its infancy. I mean, we've still got a small number of collaborations. It's a confidential service, so I don't want to go into specific,
of course not,
specific examples. But we've had some really big successes with sort of our initial projects,
and I guess it highlights again, if you're getting a broad range of people that are using the service from different disciplines, it highlights how much maths underpins a lot of the sciences.
I mean, it's incredible, really. When I look, I don't think I really appreciated that. You know, as someone who just did a maths degree and then taught in schools, and then I didn't really think that there was this such widespread. I don't think it really ever came across to me in my early part of my career, whereas now I can just see that it's just literally everywhere. And I mean, particularly in this university, I think quite
STEM
focus sort of elements.
So you say you're sort of in the maths department as well.
Yeah.
So how's your role sort of, so you've got this like professional service aspect of your role, and then you also got stuff teaching in the maths department?
So the maths department role is a bit of a weird one because I'm not normal. I haven't got the same sort of route into the role that I have, which is lecturer. I mean, it all started because I took up a role as the maths outreach officer, so I was interested in outreach, and the outreach officer role that I took on was actually in admissions. It was for the widening participation office, which is sort of as part of admissions. But I always sat in the maths department. And I had a sort of like new guinea pig type role where they were putting outreach into specific departments rather than looking at outreach more generally.
Right.
So a lot of what admissions do is sort of like general, like, do a lot of outreach in terms of personal statement writing, general skills, but there wasn't a lot of this sort of really specific subject-based outreach support at the time. And so I took on this role as the maths outreach officer, and I sort of did lots of things at the time. There was all sorts of different sort of trials and pilots and things, and we did discover and path over two of the things which are very successful programs here. There sort of are the WP run those across lots of different subjects, which are they are widening participation, so students who come from sort of disadvantaged backgrounds, and they get to come and do summer schools and that sort of stuff to try and get them to encourage to come to university. And so we set up a math stream, and I sort of helped design the material with some of the academics in the maths department. And sort of in that process, I just became very embedded in the maths department, got involved with the Communicating Maths unit, which is a third year undergraduate unit, which we run at the university here. And after 1 year of doing that, the maths department then employed me sort of separately. So I sort of made this sort of transition from admissions into actually being in the maths department. And to start with, I just the reason I just sort of helped out on the Communicating Maths course, and because I haven't really said this, but I was a teacher in high school, in secondary schools. I worked a lot with students who were sort of taking the transition between A-level mathematics, or for A-level further mathematics and undergraduate first year study. And we had quite a lot of students back in that day who, they didn't quite meet the tariff for the university, or they were struggling, or they had a different international profile. And so I just helped them talk. It wasn't very formal in any way at all. I just sort of supported them. And that role then grew and grew and grew. It still is growing. It's sort of ever growing. So now years later, I'm the unit convener for Communicating Maths, and I've taken that on from Professor Greg who ran the unit for years. And then I've sort of got involved. We've had this process of curriculum transformation here at the university, and there was a unit called Foundations, which is one of our first year units, and that has been sort of something where I've been sort of trying to use my experience of understanding where students came from. And so that's how I've sort of like developed this sort of teaching role in the department. So I don't teach, I don't teach Galois theory to third-years, or like, I don't do that. That's not the role that I perform. I do these sort of weird around the edges type things. And as part of that, things like maths education projects, those sorts of slightly different type of teaching experience rather than sort of taught content based.
But I think it's important to show that there is space and there is a requirement for people like yourself in maths departments when, as you say, not everybody's got the same experiences, but we can learn from.
That's exactly right. And there's a lot of people who don't like supervising projects, or they don't like teaching big numbers of students, or they don't like doing units that've got coursework, or have a presentation or something. That people have different sets of skills, and those are all the things I've just mentioned, all the things I quite like. Yeah, I like talking about and doing, always with maths at the heart of it all. But certainly those are the things which I think I sort of brought to the department, or at least sort of they were there in the department already. But that now I have the space and sort of remit to be able to do it.
Yeah, and I think it's in the same way that when you study maths at A level and maybe even undergrad, you don't necessarily get exposure to these sorts of things in the same way that you don't necessarily appreciate how much maths there is in biology or chemistry.
Yeah.
And if you're giving the next generation of undergrads that exposure to like there are these
other things.
Yes.
Exactly.
So what does a maths education sort of project look like?
Yeah. So they've been sort of that they have been here in the department on and off for a number of years. As Sir Jane White is one of the people who's supervised maths education projects. I mean, maths education as a whole kind of entity is a completely large world that I'm not entirely embedded in. One of our colleagues in the skills centre's got a PhD in maths education. We don't have a maths education department here like some other departments. Loughborough, for example, has completely separate, I believe, completely separate like departments. Like, I guess it's just that distinction, like where you might have a maths department and a statistics department, whereas here we're all in together. And because there hasn't really been anyone who's done maths education type stuff in any great detail in the past, this is sort of like a new sort of thing. But a maths education project, I mean, the projects that we've done this year have been about sort of looking at gender-related issues within maths. That was one of the projects I supervised this year, sort of looking at how gender affects attainment and also motivation and outcomes. And the project sort of is, I suppose, different from a normal maths project, I suppose, in that there was a literature review and you sort of trying to sort of garner some questions from the literature that exists around that. And then trying to do some sort of focus group, sort of looking at kind of a sort of focus kind of questionnaire or some sort of idea of like working out or looking at some data that already exists, and then doing some analysis and trying to see whether you can answer those questions about whether or not there is an effect of whatever is your question in that particular case.
So was this a master's level?
No, so well, that's a good question. I mean, so actually at the moment they've mainly been BSc level projects. So we have a BSc level 1 semester project in third year where you can do BSc projects for all sorts of things. I think the future will hold. I hope the future will hold some masters level, but like I said, we're sort of growing this thing. So I think that, I mean, there are other universities where you could do a masters level project in education. So I think that hopefully will come at some stage.
I guess it depends on having the people that are willing to supervise it.
So yeah, that's exactly right. It's about having the staff in place, I suppose, to really embed that as an idea in the minds of people who are doing a maths degree. And I think also it's about having that consistency throughout the whole course. So I was talking about the foundations and connections unit earlier, but like we put this year in a small element of maths education type kind of chat in that unit, because I think then that comes in first year, so then they might think, oh well, maybe I can do a project in third year. It's like that progression and having that in your mind. I think otherwise if you go into a maths degree, you can get sort of bogged down in the other units where you're just sitting an exam and it's very it's either pure maths or like whatever it is you're doing. You don't think about all these other options. So I guess it's just about exactly having the staff, but also making the students aware that it's even a thing.
Yeah, definitely. So I suppose going back all the way to your education history, you did maths undergrad here.
Yeah, I did. That is I'd grown up in Cornwall and did just British system A levels, and just came here when I was 18 and did maths degree. I mean, it seems like a lifetime ago now, but it was quite different then, really. I think now to now, and then after that, I just decided that I remember sort of vividly getting the sort of third year and realizing that I liked certain things and how people had delivered me mathematics and not others.
We all definitely have opinions on our lecturers.
Like it sort of struck me that this was this was something that really had affected me in terms of the outcomes, but also the way I felt about the maths and how confident I was or how much I enjoyed it. And I just suddenly realised that's what I wanted to think about a bit more. And so I did a PGCE, which is a postgraduate certificate in education. I actually did that here at Bath too. It's a course that doesn't exist anymore here at the Bath University, but I did it here, and that was really eye-opening. I mean, it was education that was very focused on school-based education. And that's what I went into for the very early part of my career. I became a secondary school teacher for over a decade, and that's where I started. But I guess that's where my educational beliefs and things have come from. But I think that now, having made that switch from school-based education into higher education, gives me this unique perspective, really, because because there aren't many people who have actually done that. I don't think. They're either started in HE and stayed in HE, or started in school instead.
Did you always, so from sort of GCSE or even earlier, like A level, what did you always think? You always knew that you wanted to do maths, or
that's a really good question. I'm not. I don't think so. No.
Okay.
I always liked maths. I think looking back on my education, that's sort of really formative of my education. When I think about it now, I think I was sort of spoon-fed quite a lot of maths. I was quite good at it, and I conformed, I suppose, to the education system. But when I look at it now, I think I would love to have been able to have more sort of like problem solving. I felt that I think it was quite rigid the way I was taught. And here's an example. If you can't do this, I'm going to show you how to do it, rather than like those sorts of leading questions about how you can or building that mathematical resilience, or kind of like kind of aspect that we know is what makes good mathematicians now. And I'm not clear that there's that age I was mature enough within the structure and the education that I had to really get to grips with that. And that's the bit that I really love. So I know I'm not sure that was really what I wanted to do. I just got into A levels. I did quite well in my maths, and I just did what lots of kids do, and I just thought, well, I'll just go and do the best one that I'm going to do. And I think I was quite young. I mean, I came at 18. I went straight through. So I had parents who said to me, that's a good one to do.
Exactly.
Go for it.
Yeah. And maths it is such a versatile subject.
Everyone says that to me. You go and do that, and then you can decide later.
You can't go far wrong with
it. I almost sort of was batting it down the line about what I thought I wanted to do, really.
Yeah. Because I think it's quite interesting that, again, from what I know of, like maybe my friends' experiences, I think if people come and do a maths degree, you tend to know or have an inkling that you might want to go into teaching at the first instance. But it's interesting that developed.
So I knew I didn't want to do like financy sort of stuff. I knew that. I knew that wasn't what I was going to do. But I don't think I had a really firm idea of what I wanted to do.
So from my perspective, I had an offer to do teaching through a PhD. But I teach first. and I chose to do a PhD, but I would definitely consider doing teaching afterwards as a big thing because I do enjoy sort of like teaching and going into like maths and undergrad. Like I definitely didn't think about doing teaching, but more sort of did math.
Yeah.
So
I don't think I really thought about it too much right until right at the end, really. Honestly, I sort of started. I knew I wanted to do something. I suppose it sounds a bit moralistic, but possible. I wanted to do something worthy. I didn't want to go and work just for money. It was never about that. Really. I never wanted to be like that, and so I just and I sort of helped a few people and so forth in my final year and like tutoring, that sort of stuff, and I just thought I could do this, and that's why I went and did a PGCE. I don't even think at that stage I was absolutely dead set on becoming a teacher. I just wanted to learn more about how people learn and thought about mathematics.
Yeah.
And then you sort of get suckered in, I guess. And I got offered a job, and that and then like, things happen, don't they?
Yeah.
You just get sucked in. And I absolutely loved being in a school. Absolutely loved it. The community aspect of being a member of staff in a school, and just having this sort of massive impact on such a large number of people. And I still think I'll probably go back to it at some stage because I just absolutely loved it. I loved being in school, and it was good.
And I mean, what you said earlier about you had some lecturers that just again didn't like the way they taught or what, and it really, unfortunately, it is the case that your teachers shape your opinions and your experiences.
Exactly.
Like the only reason that I did a maths degree in the first place is because I had a maths teacher in school that pushed me to do that. And again, if you respond positively to that,
and I think when you're on the other end of that, like having been a teacher who's done that, who's gone, go on, go and do it. And then they go and do that, and it can feel so good from the other side of it as well as, and I also maths isn't my only interest. I love sport, and I love sort of music, and I love all sorts of things. And that was the thing at that stage in my life. I was like being in a school environment where I can do all these other things as well. I wasn't. It felt like I just had opened my wings a bit, really. Being in a school, really. And while a lot of my sort of peers from my degree had gone into the world of finance, were just in London. I felt like I'd really kind of had this wonderful experience, and I got to travel as well. I went and taught in New Zealand, and that was just lovely. Like that's still one of my sort of really treasured sort of memories of that sort of time of my life.
How does sort of the secondary, because presumably you went to secondary school education in New Zealand. How's that different to the UK?
It's very different. I mean, I should say I didn't go and get a job. I travelled, and I got my qualifications sort of certified to go there, and then I did lots of short-term contracts. So I worked in lots of different schools and for an agency. So I had one contract, a couple of months, whatever. But really, I dibbled and sort of went in and out, I guess, of teaching in New Zealand. It is really mad. I mean, they have a middle school set up.
Right.
I mean, I know we do have that in some areas of the UK, but it's pretty rare. So I went into like a year 7 class expecting it to be like a year 7 class here in the UK, and it was more like a primary school. They just taught like a primary school. So that was weird. And their sort of focus on the curriculum was very different. Like they had, like sort of their sort of like balance between number or algebra or geometry was very different from how we teach mathematics here. It was very different. It was a very different experience. One that I think really shaped how I felt about what math education should be like.
Do you think it helped, I guess, change your teaching style as well?
Like without a doubt, absolutely, because again, like I think when I started in my first school in the UK, I had this quite fixed idea of what I thought learning should look like, and it's taken me decades really to really just look at how learners develop, and that was something that was very apparent when I went to New Zealand, was that there was this completely different way of thinking and teaching and learning, and the emphasis and motivation was completely different. And yeah, it totally shaped how you think. And actually, interestingly, like recently with COVID and all the changes that brought learning online and it did all that again. It's like thrust my whole educational beliefs and kind of things all again. So I do believe that there are always things that you can look at and change in terms of how one learns generally, but specifically mathematics.
Yeah. And you mentioned in your sort of brief overview that you gave us, so I think this was a little bit later once you'd moved to the university, but you did some work for the Pearson exam board as well.
The reason why there is a bit of a gap there actually. I mean, the reason why I left school education was because I had children. I've got two little children, and school. Yeah, in that period of my life, I just didn't know what I was doing. And so I started to work for the Pearson exam board when I was on maternity leave, basically to get some extra money. Just at that time in my life, it wasn't like a sort of decision that I made strategically for my career or anything. But Pearson are an exam board that run GCSE level mathematics. Okay, and I just started marking for them to start with. That's how I sort of started, because you can get like marking contracts that give you money in the summer or whatever, and then I became a team leader as part of that over a number of years, and sort of looked, and that was really interesting because that really sort of focused my mind on how assessment drives learning, and that I think now is something that's really apparent to me at university level, how particularly with the advent of sort of all this AI things and how that's affecting assessment, is how assessment can really change how students or pupils feel about what they need to do or how they're going to get somewhere. And I mean, I'm quite passionate about diversifying assessment generally. Because I think the kind of normal thing is that mathematics is examined. And
And how much of your sort of experience and I guess your beliefs do you feel like did you manage to sort of affect that kind of change while you were working there, or get to work towards those changes?
It's just a massive company, really, and really a small cog in a big organisation. But it certainly affected me, I think, as a person, about how questions can be structured and what they can do as a teacher or a learner within that sort of I've seen the question. You want me to answer it?
Well, for the benefit of our viewers, well, Seb's just typed a question in our chat. So in what ways do you think that assessment then can be diversified?
Well, I mean, I believe that you can have presentations, written courseworks, all sorts of different types of written coursework. Group, I think it's really, really important for assessments to have some elements of group work as well, because as professionals, we collaborate with people all the time, and yet I think I did my entire degree just working on my own and being assessed entirely on my own. I think that's really sad. And I said before, I teach this communicating maths unit, and they have to work on that course as a group, and it often throws up all these massive problems about how you work with someone else, or what your sort of like division of labour is within your group. All these things that might not necessarily feel like they're particularly specific to mathematics, but I just think if you can have a mix of different things, then actually it's really good for you, not just with the mathematics, but about your sort of development as a person and how you learn and how you interact with people. I mean, so on the foundations unit, I was just having a conversation this morning about how we assess on that unit. I mean, because that is a lot about reading and writing mathematics, and whether or not a student can or cannot do that. So that is a skill as opposed to like a piece of content. So like like in an exam, you can ask a question like, can you integrate this thing? And it's quite easy to assess, I think, in some respects. But I think at undergraduate level, we don't have a lot of those critiquing kind of questions. Can you look at this solution and tell me where the errors are and rewrite it.
Mm.
Like, that's not a model that's particularly embedded, I don't think, in
No.
our university structure, but actually has quite a lot of value.
I think I've seen that type of question quite a lot with coding modules. I think is one I've seen it a lot of, like, why is this code wrong?
Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever seen it as like from like a maths point of view.
But then, don't you think that, like, as part of your PhD and your research, that's something that you must do all the time?
Yeah. So then, in hindsight, it's a really useful thing.
To have done it. It's a
Yeah.
skill that, like, you're right. It's not there really, but it could be.
Yeah.
And I believe there's quite a lot of benefit. And I should say as well, I'm not just talking about summative assessment, but formative assessment. Why we can't use those things in our formative assessment processes. I think.
What is summative and formative
So
assessment?
summative being the bit that you get your grade for.
Okay.
But the formative bit is the bit that you do, like, your problem sheets.
Okay.
It's like you sort of, you're informing yourself, I suppose, or as you get towards the summative stuff. So I do, I'm not saying it has to be, something you have to grade. It's just like an activity that you get feedback on throughout the process of doing some sort of unit.
Yeah, and I guess those are the sorts of things that lend themselves to group work.
Oh yeah,
because you can be giving each other feedback,
peer assessment.
and,
There's all sorts of stuff. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and I think those things are more, from my perspective, with the background I've got, those things are much more prevalent in school-based education than they are in HE, which I find quite strange.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why. I don't know why that's happened or why that seems to be the case, because actually there are techniques and things which can benefit all learners, whatever age or stage they're
Yeah. So I suppose we should mention that you don't have a PhD.
No, I don't.
Which is at no detriment whatsoever to yourself.
Sometimes it is. I think you're being kind, but
no. But again, you've showed that you don't need a PhD to work in higher education.
I do believe that I think it would be better for me to have a PhD if I was teaching certain modules. Like I was talking earlier, there's no way you would get me to walk into teaching alcohol or something. Because I just think, whilst I studied those things when I did my undergraduate, I do sort of believe you kind of got to go further to be able to teach something to come back. So it is sort of somewhat detrimental if someone wanted to say they wanted me to teach that. But that's never happened. That's not my goal. And no, I don't think anyone in the department would ever think that would be the right thing for me to do.
Yeah.
So, but the stuff that I work on in first year, and sort of like I work a lot with tutors, trying to sort of think about how they can change their practice, those sorts of things. The teaching I do around that is something, I'm not sure that my experience, I suppose, in having been in sort of lots of different education settings, I suppose, is what holds me firm in those situations, really.
But was a PhD ever sort of on your radar?
No,
it's never been something you considered.
No, well, not at the time. I don't think. Never. Really, and really recently, I've thought I would. I feel like my kids are slightly older now, and I somehow got out the fog of having a baby, like feeling like a human again. Now they're a bit older, and I would really like to study again. I think because I just like learning. I really love it. But I don't think a PhD is the right thing for me now. Not right now. I just don't think it would be possible in my 40s to give. I mean, I suppose it is right for some people, but for me, I'm not sure about that. Back in the day, like, I think if I had my time over again, I probably would. If I could have the benefit of hindsight, I might have done something. Because I think it is quite hard to go back. Like I say, it's quite hard to go back having had a career and done lots of different things.
It's not unheard of, but again, it's personal preference.
I have to say, like, at the time, it's just something that nobody ever said anything to me about at all.
And again, it's that exposure. Like, if you weren't told about that,
I just don't even really think I really even understood how one would do that. I don't know, that's a bit mad now, but I just think maybe I was just completely oblivious to it. But I was really young as well. Like I said, I graduated at 21. It wasn't. It wasn't like I had lots of life experience, and Yeah.
Do you think that's... Sorry, Henry.
I was going to say, if you were to do a PhD, would it be in maths education or
I
in,
think you probably would.
normal sort of research
Yeah.
labs?
I mean, I didn't find my maths degree very easy. I mean, you talked to me about,
Did any
like,
of us?
I mean, I definitely wasn't in the position where, I thought, oh, yes, let's study some more, because I think maybe that's part of it, because I was just ready to go and do something practical at that point in my life. Yeah, so I think if I did it now, I would consider doing something mathematical, maybe something just completely wacky and different. I don't know. I don't know.
PhD in fine art.
Yeah, that would be good, wouldn't it? I don't think I'm going to do that. Actually, I don't think I'm going to do a PhD at all, really. But yeah, fine art would be a stretch, I think. Yeah. But I mean, maths education in itself would be an interesting. I think I would quite like to do that if I maybe one day.
I guess that combines sort of your two passions in a
Yeah.
sense of you're still learning,
Yeah.
you'd be learning something new,
Yeah.
but about the kind of things that you can then apply
I
to.
have an amazing colleague over in MAST, Evie, who's got a PhD in maths education, and she's constantly just saying stuff to me all the time, and I just like, what, talk to me about it. Like, I'm really interested in what she's done and her research, and yeah, so I think maybe that is what I'd like to do, I suppose. Yeah, it just feels like there's not enough time to do everything now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like there never feels like there's enough time for anything, but I suppose having been on the periphery of like higher education and in recent years, like you said, you didn't feel like a PhD was something that you were necessarily aware of.
No.
Do you think that kind of advertising and that sort of, I guess, showing people that this is what a PhD is better in recent years, or?
I think it probably has. I'm not sure that I don't know. It's difficult. And also because my experience is quite Bath centric. I haven't got this experience of having done my undergrad somewhere else and, coming to different universities. So I'm not sure I'm very well placed to answer that question, really. I certainly think it is difficult. When I talk to my third year students, I think a lot of them don't have a clue what to do. But I'm not sure that's specific to doing a PhD. I think that's just specific to thinking about a career in general. Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I mean, I again, I don't know very much about it. But when we have a career service, I don't know what they do, if I'm honest, and what they say. Yeah.
As an undergrad, I don't think I ever went.
No, but I don't know whether or not that's just whether they exist and you don't go.
Yeah,
or whether
I think
or not.
because of like COVID and stuff, it was on my third and fourth year of COVID, so I wasn't really on campus.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of students aren't all on campus enough, so maybe that is just what's changed. Is that yeah. I think if I'd have probably had more people to talk to about it at the time, I might have considered something different. So I guess these sorts of things and talking and just having interactions with people can help. Just widen your understanding of what you could do, I guess.
Yeah. But I'm sure you have no regrets.
Really? No. I don't think where I am now is where I would ever have thought I was going to be. I guess. Well, I think really until I had my children, I just thought I was going to be a leader in schools. And, I'd been head of maths in 2 schools by the time I was like 27. I was thinking that that's what I was going to do. I thought I'd go on and be, an assistant head, and that's what I thought I was going to do. And because of the children, and because it isn't easy to be a teacher as a parent, actually, because it's quite an inflexible career. I think I just sort of at the time just sort of thought, I'll take another job, and so I sort of leapt across into this outreach role, and it was never planned. It just sort of happened, and now I sort of think, well, what would I give back? What would I do next? I still don't think I'm really at a point where I'm sure that this is what I'm going to do forever. I just feel like I really enjoy it at the moment, and while I'm enjoying it, and this last year has just been amazing. Like I've done, I presented a poster at an international maths education conference last week, something that I could never dreamt of doing when I was a teacher at school. Like it's like completely different. So I do feel like my experiences are just sort of growing. They're not necessarily going in a particular direction. I'm just
yeah.
and I'm not massively ambitious, really. I just, you know, I mean, I just quite, if I'm happy, I feel like I've got some value, then then I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a nice note to go to a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
We can take a few minutes, but don't go anywhere. And then when we come back, we can probably go into a little bit more detail about your role here and how you stood out in outreach. So,
Sure.
okay, we'll see you in a few.
Hello, welcome back. We're here for sort of second half of our sort of conversation we've been having.
Yeah. So we've chatted through sort of like your experience and your work in teaching and your work in academia. But I guess we can chat a little bit more now in detail about what your role was when you first moved into academia. So you were employed as maths outreach officer.
Yeah, that's right. So I saw this job advert when my kids were little, and I was sort of deciding whether or not to leave school education, and it was for the widening participation office, which is something which is, if you don't know, is a sort of structure within university setup that helps to gain access for and support students who come from socially disadvantaged backgrounds or underrepresented groups. Actually, is the right word to say. So it's not just about social deprivation, but it's about ethnicity or being female in science or whatever it is. And I just read the advert and thought, that's that I believe in all of those things. If I could go in and do this, that would be wonderful. So I started in this job, and it was part-time, and to start with, people just sort of, well, why don't you try some things? It was quite experimental. I found it quite hard, actually, after having had this real structured, like the bell goes at 9:15 and you have to teach about fractions for an hour. And then I was there at my desk then going, you can sort of you can design if you like.
Was that again quite a new thing at the time?
Participation sort of setup. It all comes through the app, the Access and Participation Plan from the university. So it's all sort of set out and structured in that way. But at the time, the head of the widening participation sort of wanted to put departmental officers in place. So they'd had sort of central outreach officers involved in sort of running summer schools and that sort of stuff, but they wanted sort of more specific subject areas. So I was one of the first ones, being someone from physics, and so I only ever did maths specific outreach. It was quite tricky though, because there's outreach for the greater good. There's stuff which you can't always evidence. But then also the widening participation, obviously, the team, they wanted us to evidence people walking through the door. So it was sometimes, I found that quite difficult to often kind of get the right balance between sort of thinking, oh, well, the best thing for all these students in this room would be this, but I've got to concentrate on these ones because these ones are the ones that fit the profile of what we want to try to really attract. So I found that quite hard, but it was fun. I did all sorts of different things. We set up a student group called the Mathematicians, which still sort of semi-runs. I mean, it all sort of went a bit wrong in COVID, but Willie Daddy's one of the academics in the department sort of runs that now. That was really, I had lots of fun doing that. As I said before, we ran Discover and Pathway, and I don't know what possessed me to do it, but we recorded it all in 2019, which was wonderful when 2020 happened, because we had all these recordings of all these outreach things, and so I found that really interesting, working with sort of brilliant academics in the department who came up with sort of outreach kind of topics and kind of projects and things, and I just sort of coordinated it all and added little bits and sort of did a lot of the mentoring alongside it. So that was really, really good, and I naturally through that sort of fell into supporting Chris Budd in communications, which is really how I got, I guess, in some respects, got the job that I have now, because Chris Chris allowed me to sort of teach little bits of the course, and then sort of I was recommended as a teacher. I guess they saw me as a teacher, and it sort of lined up quite well with sort of a time in admissions where we had lots of students who didn't get the grades to get into the university, and so we had quite a few students who came who didn't have A star A in maths, maths, and that's why then they said, "Oh, Tamsin could do," because that's what sort of happened. Yeah, that's how it all sort of began, really.
Yeah. Could we go into a little bit more detail about mathematicians and pathway of discover instead? So what are they're all separate entities.
Yeah. So the mathematicians was sort of arose. The model that I had in my mind was that I wanted a student outreach group that was student led. But from its inception, it was pretty clear that just setting up an outreach group for mathematicians is not easy for students to just go, I'm going to do this thing. It takes quite a lot of effort. And Ben Sparks, who is an outreach sort of person who works here at the university as well, and I sort of decided that we would just design this model of how we thought it would work. Ben also is an ex-teacher too, so we had this sort of like school-based kind of hat on, going, well, what do schools want? What did schools want from us? What would I have liked when I was a school teacher? And so we set up these kind of activities that were they were kind of we tried to set up these, they were briefcases. That's how we went in and ran. You gave a briefcase to a student, had a little instruction in, they would take the briefcase in and run it as an activity. So it was supposed to be things that we thought about and developed as an activity that would then be taken off the shelf by students from years to come. And they could go in and run an activity. And we didn't write them all. We worked with a lot of PhD students at the time who have all now gone on and left. But different students wrote different briefcases, which still exist. And before COVID, we had quite an active sort of setup where students would go out and run these different activities, and we had this sort of set format. And some of them are really lovely activities. I still really like them, and I believe that Willede still has that sort of structure where it's not quite as formalised as it used to be. We used to have a launch every year and sort of get students to come, and we would sort of train them, and then we would say, right, off you go, you can now go and do stuff. It's a bit more ad hoc, I think, now.
And was that just PhD students or
undergraduates? No, it was undergraduates all the way up. Yeah, it was anyone, basically. And actually even students who weren't from the maths department. We had a couple of like chemical engineers who really liked the idea of doing it. And so it was basically anyone who was interested in mathematics and wanted to sort of showcase a little bit of mathematics, really.
So you said these activities were sort of like activities.
There are all sorts. I mean, stuff about graph theory and networks, and we had a biologist develop one on sort of like spread of disease, and they had like a kind of modelling kind of thing. What else? There's Mobius strips ones. There's sort of ones about friction, sort of like really applied kind of sort of stuff.
So it sounds almost like a combination with some of these like big like sort of maths outreach like standard topics you sort of hear, and then actually some like slightly more like niche things you might not actually know.
And also, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because on the Communicating Maths course every year, I could predict what the students are going to choose to do for their outreach, because stuff like cryptography and graph theory, they're very, very rich sort of topic areas to be able to do really nice outreach. And so it's not really that they were particularly innovative or new. What they were was structured and resourced, ready to go. And Ben and I, as the other students at the time, really sort of thought about how you could deliver it and wrote instructions for someone who was brand new. I mean, if you come in at 18 and you haven't done any outreach, it's quite daunting, I think, to go and talk to a group of people about mathematics. But if you have one of these briefcases that says you should spend 5 minutes discussing this aspect, and here's a problem you could present to them, here's a load of kind of cards that you could hand out for them to discuss and sort out. That was the idea. Was it was supposed to smooth that transition into being able to deliver something. And the idea was that we would let the group roll, so that once they had been set up, the older students or some more experienced students would come through and support the less experienced students, and then they would all sort of develop their own material, and it would sort of snowball and exist without staff support. So that was the sort of model, and to a certain degree that has happened. But I mean, as I said, COVID really, really affected that, because we had this massive break in that connection between the older and
you couldn't, I guess. So we hadn't planned for anything being online.
No, it was specifically designed to be hands on, and then all of a sudden the world was hands off.
Yeah,
and it just stopped for a while, and it never. To be honest, it's never really got going. But with the right sort of person, I think, and the right time allocation, it is a really, really beneficial thing. Because it was such a lovely thing to connect Bath University to the community and the schools around us, and also gave such wonderful experience to the students who went out and did those things. It was, it is. I think those things can be really valuable on a number of different levels. Really.
What sort of age group were you targeting with those?
So there was different ones for different age groups. I mean, we had a primary school set up, and then we had a secondary school set up. In actual fact, some of them really just didn't matter how old you were. I mean, because some of those things like Mobius strips you can cut up when you're 5 and still think is really cool when you're 35. So it doesn't, it's more about intrigue and inspiration, I suppose, rather than. I mean, some of them relied on content that you would have had to have gone through Year 7 maths, but not a lot of them. A lot of them were quite sort of broad, really, in their approach.
And who came up with the name Mathematicians? Was that you or Ben?
For now, I'll blame Ben.
Depending on whether we think it's
honestly, it was like a lifetime ago. Stuff like that. I don't know what it's called.
No, we like a pun behind the research.
Exactly.
So
But then you asked about Pathway and Discover as well. They were sort of different because they were structures that were set up by the Widening Participation Office, and they are structures which still exist. So that was slightly different. So the Mathematicians was something that we created out of nothing, basically. Whereas with Pathway and Discover, we were told that central administration will provide you with X number of students, and you will have to teach them something for Y number of minutes. And that's how it worked. I mean, Discover itself is a residential summer school, and students come to the university for 2 or 3 days, and there is a maths part of that. So you have to do some content as part that you would study. Like some sort of mathematics, and we set up some modules with different lecturers who delivered different modules of work, and the students came and did that in person in Discover. Pathway was very similar, but it was sort of a hybrid online where they did a little bit over a long period of time and then paying for a shorter residential.
Right, okay.
And the intent with those two, and I still believe it is that if you come to those things, you get a contextualised offer to come to university, so you get to drop a grade if you've done Discover or Pathway. So there was a very clear admissions remit for that. Whereas with Mathematicians, it was more about community.
So you're targeting a Pathway and Discover people sitting their A levels there.
That's exactly right. Year 12. That's exactly right.
Were they specifically targeted at, again, underrepresented groups?
Absolutely. So they were. That's exactly right. Underrepresented groups within the different subject areas. I mean, the university has a sort of tagging system and what that really means. I won't go into that into too much depth because it sort of changes. Essentially underrepresented groups, which, like, say, for example, for certain social sciences might be that you're female or male or whatever, but also sort of BAME students or disabled students or mature students, or it could be literally and also primarily students who come from sort of socially deprived. I mean, the big thing that was difficult with that is that of course we asked for further math here, and that's a bit tricky for some students because lots of schools don't always offer it.
Yeah. I mean, I was quite lucky that my school didn't offer it, but they did like a partner scheme with a school down the road. So we like swapped A levels.
That's
and
exactly right.
Yeah.
So I mean, further maths causes all sorts of havoc in that regard. So I think maths is quite a strange sort of setup in terms of admissions for that reason.
It's not taken into account all the random different extra testing you
exactly.
can do.
I mean, step. Well,
and
also all the just different modules that you can do within the structure. Kind of, and actually, that's one of the big problems with sort of like the stuff I do now on foundations. I guess that's the sort of segue into that. Really, is that actually our students are all quite different when they arrive, mathematically speaking, in terms of what their lived experiences are and what modules they've done and what experiences. I mean, having done something like a step training or something, step being the sort of one of the admissions tests that you take for other universities, where there's this really hard problem solving stuff. If you've gone through that process, you might think differently about how you learn or how you approach a problem. And so, that's what I mean about having this kind of really diverse range of types of students here. And that's actually what we're sort of trying to address, I guess, as part of foundations at the beginning of our undergraduate course here, is trying to say, well, let's look at lots of different experiences. How do we solve problems? How do we write precisely? How do we understand definitions? How do we read things?
And is that's what the foundations and connections module consists of? Or the more elements to it?
But I'm not sure I can directly quote the learning outcomes of the course to you off the top of my head. But essentially, it's about being able to read and write mathematics. And there is no content per se. It's not like we're teaching them what a complex number is. It's like, how do you read this sentence? How do you critique this? How do you make this more elegant? How do you correct this? How do you look at something in a different way? And that's what it's about.
And do the students have any sort of input on that in a sense of like what they would like to learn, or what they
in foundations module? No, I don't think so, really. I mean, the only thing I would say about that unit in general is that the tutorials that are associated with it are very different than the tutorials that are associated with the other units. So for those people who don't know, sort of a lot of our units consist of, you have a lecture and then you have a tutorial which has got a problem sheet, and you sit with a tutor and you work through the questions on the tutor. Whereas for foundations, that isn't the case. You have a lecture where there's lots of discussion, and then in the tutorial or the seminars afterwards, there might be a discussion point written on the board, and you have to sit and talk about it with your peers rather than actually do something. So I suppose in that sense, the students have a bit more ownership about the direction of the conversation. But that discussion point has been sort of preset. So in that regard,
it's allowing them the space to be inquisitive.
That's exactly
whereas
right.
Other maths courses, I guess, it falls into the trap of it's very easy to do in a systematic way. So let's only do it in a systematic way.
I think that is the way. Exactly. And then the connections unit, which is the second semester unit that comes with the foundations unit, is where students get to present a little bit of whatever they choose. So we present, so there are 7 research groups in the department, and each of those research groups presents a small kind of cameo, I suppose, about their group or the maths within their group, and then students get to choose one to research a bit further and present. So there is a bit more autonomy within connections, I think, in terms of what they do for their assessment. So it's a little bit freer. It is a very different type of unit where there isn't. I always think of it as like a skills unit rather than a content-based unit, because I think you just are always looking at what you need to do.
Just to get the grades.
How new of a module is it?
So I think field foundations run 3 years now.
Okay, because I definitely didn't do it when I was an undergrad here.
I think last year was the 3rd year, and it sort of changed its iterations over time. It's still developing. It's not a very stable unit in the sense that, if you did it last year, it wouldn't necessarily be
Yeah.
doing this year.
But then I guess it should have that flexibility to change as the student body changes, and
yeah, exactly.
and then so your other sort of taught unit that you're the lead on the unit now, for communication.
Yeah, so this is a unit. Communicating maths again is quite unique. I believe it's the only maths communication taught unit at undergraduate level in the country.
Right, okay.
I believe.
Mhm.
I'm very happy to. If anyone's listening to this that knows another one, you can talk to me because I would love to talk to other people who are doing the same thing. But I don't think there is actually a sort of dedicated unit. There are maths education units, and there are other units that have sort of aspects of outreach. But
I mean, so I remember doing something
yeah,
when I think it was my second year of undergrad, and I don't think it was quite fully maths communication, but it was a joint unit where we had like we did some work with partners. So we did like an industry project. It was a group project, and then we had to learn how to, I guess, communicate our findings to them. And we also, I think one of our projects was we had to make like a board game that was going to be then engaging, kind of like, I guess, a mathematician sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing you just talked there, because I think this isn't purely about. Well, I suppose it's about deciding what your motivation for communication is. So we all have to be good communicators as researchers. That is true. You have to think about how your mathematics can be read, and you can present your mathematics and so on. This is really quite focused, the communicating maths unit, on recreational maths. Okay, that is definitely at the heart of it. So it's more about thinking about how you can inspire different audiences to love mathematics. So we do have elements of the course where students go out and do schools placements, for example, but they don't go into a school and teach students how to add fractions. That is not what they do at all. They would pick something like a mathematician's box style thing and say, right, well, today I'm going to talk to you about graph theory, and I'm going to show you the bridges of Königsberg, or something, something like that isn't curriculum based per se. It's more about how it's presented, how you hook people. And I say people because it depends on what your audience is, whether or not that's general public or a school class or whatever, whoever your audience is, how you hook those people in to doing something, sort of some sort of experience that they can go away and go, that was pretty cool. I like that. I want to think about that a bit more. And so that's sort of what the communicating maths course does. We train people to have that experience. It's very unique. The students love it because it's so very different from what they do elsewhere.
Do you get a good uptake of students on the course?
Unfortunately this year we had to turn people away who were oversubscribed. So it is very popular, and we do have sort of limited resource in terms of like having, like, because obviously they go out and do things like master classes and they go into school, and so if we have a sort of limited number of places that we can go and manage those things, so unfortunately we do have to limit it. We are going to be a year-long unit though, so not this next coming academic year, but the following year it's becoming a 10-credit year-long unit. So we are hoping that there's some sort of expansion of what we're doing there in terms of what they can go, where they can go and do their, we call them mathematical interactions. That's that's a sort of broad term for them going into school or running a master class or making a YouTube video, whatever it might be. So hopefully we'll be able to broaden that out when we get to a unit.
And do you think, when you just mentioned like making YouTube video could be one of the examples, do you think maths communication has changed with like the rise of like digital content?
All the time. Absolutely. Someone a few years ago handed in their assessment, which was like some Roblox thing, and I was like, I don't even know what that is. I'm supposed to be assessing this, and I have to like learn what, and it is ever changing. I think if I think about my experience back when I did my degree, like years ago, YouTube didn't exist, and so we have to change with the times. And we're recently someone asked whether or not they could do a series of TikTok videos.
Yeah.
Again, like we were like, right, well, hang on a minute. We have to adapt. We will have to accept, it's the same like last year someone asked if they could do a podcast, whereas previously we'd only accepted videos. So you're absolutely right. We have to change.
Yeah.
I mean, the main problem with the communicating maths unit in that regard is that we have to assess students because it's a credit-bearing unit. So the only thing is that we have to ensure is that there is comparable means to assess across all the different units, because they optionally choose in these different formats. So we do restrict to a certain extent the things that they can and can't do. Like, so for example, a board game, someone made a board game a few years ago, and it was great, but we were like, how do I say whether or not that's any better or worse than someone who's gone in made a video? So we've sort of written all these structures to make sure that there is parity.
Like outside of an assessment structure, do you think?
There's masses. I mean, there's so much that's going on. Even sort of things like like the writing elements of things. I think there are first of all sort of actual publications like Chalk Dust, which are completely different from like a sort of a blog or some sort of article that goes online, or even an article for a completely different magazine like Quanta or something, something that's got a higher level of like the tone of it even is completely different. So there's so much, and we try really hard on the course to sort of have this like massive exposure to so many things, and every year Ben and Malik and I look at each other and go, we haven't done enough. There's always more. So we're hoping that going to a year-long unit means that we can just broaden that out a bit and make sure that everybody can really see something and
get their teeth sunk into
something completely different. And I also think it's really important there as well, like if you're talking about student sort of student autonomy, like I would actually hate to make a YouTube video. I would find that really challenging. I don't think I would like it. But that's where everybody's different, and that's why maths communication is so great, because you can basically everybody can find their little room in it. Everyone has something. If there's someone who just wants to sit at home, they can write beautiful articles or blogs, or like you say, you can sit down and make a game or something. You don't even have to be the person who's in front of an audience delivering something. Or then and then the other side of the spectrum, you have someone like Ben who loves to get up and give a show. And that's not for everybody. And that's why I think there is a place for maths communication or science communication generally, actually, for everybody.
And why do you think, I mean, we've touched on this in parts, but like, why do you think science and maths communication is important?
Well, I think we have a very, in our education, a school-based education system, it's, unfortunately, that's an opinion from me. I think, unfortunately, it's very curriculum focused. We have I've been in those classes where you're like, I really just want to talk to the students about this cool thing that they've noticed about this circle, but I've only got 40 minutes. And I have to teach them what the equation of a circle is. And unfortunately, that's not teachers' fault. That is just the sort of structure that we have. So whilst you can be, and there are many, 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 many thousands of them, really inspirational teachers in our schools and in our universities as well, I think having those extra kind of sparky moments for students who are really interested, just to sort of light that sort of that spark, I think is really, really, really important. And if you can do that, then actually it can motivate them to re-engage or engage further in what they're doing in their kind of taught studies. I think they go hand in hand. I think I'm not saying teachers can't be inspirational and they can't talk about enrichment type things. I just think
they're restricted.
They are a bit restricted, and the teachers I think I really respect and think are the best are the ones who do that most.
Yes, yeah.
I suppose. But that's quite that's quite an experienced teacher skill to do that, I think. Yeah, but that's why I think, stuff like number file and all these other kind of things that you can watch or read on the side of your mathematics as you're developing your understanding of what you like about mathematics and which areas of mathematics you like are very, very important. Yeah.
I still had a question, a sort of selfish question almost.
Okay.
As a PhD student, I'm passionate about teaching. As I said earlier, I was considering doing a teaching instead of PhD. Is there resources to improve my sort of maths teaching stuff, or how would you advise somebody else who's like currently doing a maths thing, who's passionate about maths teaching, to help sort of improve their teaching practice alongside just doing their?
That's a really good question. I mean, in this university, what you could do is contact the master service, which we discussed about earlier, because that is exactly what they would do. They would sit and talk to you and consult with you on a personal level. And I think one of the things that is you cannot get away from is just lived experience in the classroom, in the lecture hall, or whatever. And that isn't just delivering it yourself. I think just really trying to go in, watch other people deliver their practice. So you're sort of building your sphere of reference, I suppose, in terms of what you can and can't do. One of the things I think that's for me has always really improved my practice is just working with other people, listening. I mean, I'm sure Ben won't mind me saying, Ben and I work, Ben Sparks and I work really closely together. He tells me all the time I'm rubbish at certain things. Or, well, maybe that's a bit unfair, but he'll say, I didn't like the way you did that, and you should do it this way. And I will say the same to him. It's a very good relationship in that way. I think if you can find a peer, a teaching peer, who you can align with your educational beliefs, that's really important. That's not easy to find. But I think that's really, really important because, having someone to come and observe you teaching and then you observing them, like in kind of like a coaching triad or something like that. I think that is the way that you can improve. I mean, there are other external bodies as well. I mean, sort of government-based things like AMSP, all sorts of different things that you could look at for resources and so on. But my personal feeling is that talking, observing, working with like-minded people is, like anything, I guess, is the way to help you improve.
And I suppose part of what we aim to do here at Behind the Research is to, I guess, encourage people who might be there thinking like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do a PhD, or maybe I'm not sure that I'm capable of that, to think about it. But then on the other hand, if we've got people listening or watching that are pretty convinced that the PhD isn't for them, but would still like to get into like higher education, I guess what advice would you have for them?
So I think becoming a lecturer in a mathematics department without a PhD is really hard. That isn't something that, and I think I've been very lucky. Okay, so that I don't think I could wholeheartedly say it's an easy route, but there are lots of roles within maths departments and maths resource centres and within the university more widely that give you really good, valuable experience. The Maths Resource Centre, MASH, is a great example of that, where you don't have to hold a PhD or a PGC or anything if you do, for certain roles. So those roles exist. Outreach type roles are a really good way of getting into sort of maths. Teaching aligned, I suppose, without being a teacher. There's lots of places within the university, like I said, the admissions and those things within the university. But there's also external companies and bodies that are always looking for people wanting to do outreach. And there's the RI is someone we work with an awful lot, the Royal Institution, and they, Sam Durbin, who works there, she's a maths graduate who just was exactly like that, didn't want to be a teacher, but wanted to be aligned in those things. She went. I mean, there's so many different things that you you could do. A lot of it is just about getting experience to figure out what type of teaching aligned outreachy type thing you want to do or you like doing, because there almost is too many options really to really, for me to say this is the one route. So well, maybe that's not very helpful, but
just try and experience as much as possible.
I think just say yes. Just say yes to everything. Like, even if you think, oh, I'm not gonna like that, and maybe you won't. Just say yes to the people who ask you to do the streaming or whatever it might be, because I've done I just think you learn so much from those things, and you think about what you can and can't do. I do think becoming a teacher is a really good option, even if you don't want to be a teacher for life. The experience that you get from doing some teacher training, and even if you work in a school for a year, 6 months, whatever, is a wonderful way of understanding education. Thinking about what you like most about education, or some sort of route or some sort of career that you can come from. If anyone in the maths department here does want to talk about it, they can come and talk to me about teaching, and I'm very happy to talk to anyone.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to finish.
Thank you
thank you very much for coming and chatting with us. It's been really nice to showcase that there are other routes into higher education. So we'll go to a little BRB screen, and me and Henry will be back shortly. If you're watching with us now, or if you're watching on YouTube, then we will see you next time. So thank you again, Tamsin. Bye.